Of course, The Frighteners has a lot of special effects. I just love doing effects. It's like being a kid in a toy shop.
When The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King made Oscar history with an 11-statue clean sweep at the 76th Academy Awards in February of 2004, it was the culmination of a 7-year epic journey across all of New Zealand, Middle-earth, and the globe, completing one of the greatest achievements in cinema history. The Lord of the Rings was a worldwide, critically acclaimed triumph of ingenuity and enterprise that showed the potential of high fantasy to be a successful genre in the 21st century, despite the prevailing Hollywood wisdom of the time, which had the genre locked squarely in the B category. But before he was known for overseeing the Ringbearer's quest to the crack of doom, the filmmaker atop the New Zealand juggernaut was best known to me and my friends for making something very, very different, which turned out to be instrumental to Peter Jackson preparing and completing his version of Professor Tolkien's magnum opus. Hello, I'm your screen jockey, Justin Neal. Today, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite stories behind modern filmmaking.
Sound off like you...
A story I've been learning and telling for 25 years. A story about an underappreciated supernatural mishmash.
Here's Johnny. I had to just do one.
One of the best-selling works of the 20th century.
Get off the road!
And the puckish Kiwi filmmaker who got the gig adapting the latter despite the box office results of the former.
The biggest tragedy would be for me to make a film that I didn't feel personally proud of.
I could barely believe it at the time, and I still love talking about how it all happened today.
I'd love The Frighteners if I saw it.
This is the story of how Sir Peter Jackson, the guy who made The Frighteners, got to make The Lord of the Rings and how it helped him do it.
Thought of it now. My nose and ears were bleeding. Yeah, they were. You gotta love your castmates.
Flashback to New Zealand, 1992, and Peter Jackson and his partner Fran Walsh were working on the script for Heavenly Creatures, their upcoming film about the brutal Christchurch murder of 1954. While walking to the shops, they conceived the pitch of a psychic con man running ghost-busting scams on the locals.
Those suckers, they won't even know what hit them. How many exits? 2. Man, this is it.
Their previous splatter comedy, Brain Dead, was in distribution around the world, but they desperately needed work after Heavenly Creatures was completed. They wrote a 2-page story outline of the pitch and sent it to their agent Ken Cammons, forgetting about it for several months to focus on the true story of 2 New Zealand girls that commit matricide, based on the notorious Parker Helm case. In the meantime, their agent had sent it to producer-director Bob Zemeckis, who was looking for possible tales from the crypt ideas. Zemeckis liked it so much he decided to produce it as a standalone project and brought it to Universal Studios. Flashback 25 years further to 1967, and former Oxford Inkling Professor J.R.R. Tolkien was approached by United Artists to buy the rights to his novels The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which he finally agreed to, but passed away 6 years later without ever seeing a single frame of his work on screen. He took the cash for his family, and in the agreement he relinquished almost complete creative control over the IP in perpetuity, which means forever in legalese. After some false and failed starts, it was maverick animator Ralph Bakshi first properly attempted to bring The Lord of the Rings to the big screen, desperately flawed and partial though it became, following a 1977 animated TV special of The Hobbit, notable for having legendary director John Huston voice the role of Gandalf.
Your story, Bilbo, has the ring of truth. Yes, it rings true.
Bakshi brought it to producer Saul Zaentz, and what he wanted to do was shoot the entire film as live action in Spain on the cheap.
Our one hope lies in foolishness, Boromir.
And then rotoscope the animation over the footage, theoretically saving money on both ends to create something unique in the middle, almost like a movie painting. Due to the complexity and cost of the inventive animation techniques, production was behind schedule, and the studio released the unfinished movie in 1978 under the title The Lord of the Rings, with no indication that a story-completing sequel was planned, which was quickly followed by the studio refusing to pay for it anyway. However, one New Zealand moviegoer who was both amazed and baffled by the incomplete film was a 17-year-old named Peter Jackson, who was inspired to buy the tie-in paperback a few weeks later after coming across it in a train station. That is the opening music to my favorite adaptation of the material to date. It's a full-cast radio play produced by the BBC that starred Ian Helm as Frodo, who would go on to play a different role for Jackson 30 years later, and also Bill Nighy in a standout performance of Sam Gamgee. But after that celebrated production, The Ring lay dormant again, until Peter Jackson picked it up. Lucky bastard.
The Frighteners has a lot of computer graphic shots. I mean, more than I've ever had in any of my movies. A computer graphics extravaganza.
So flash forward to 1994, and filming for Heavenly Creatures had wrapped and post-production had begun, with the considerable effects work spearheaded by the incomparable Richard Taylor, who Jackson had picked up for his previous movie Brain Dead, released as Dead Alive here in the States. Taylor and his team at Weta Workshop created over 70 latex costumes for the fantasy world of Barovnia, along with all the CGI effects created under the new Weta digital banner, a brand created to tackle the advancements in computer technology used for feature filmmaking. At the time, they had a single graphics workstation for the one scene of digital effects in Heavenly Creatures, but for the Frighteners they would need much more than that, necessitating a buildup of the small effects company, leasing more computers and hiring out-of-work animators on the cheap from all over the world. Once he built up the team for the Frighteners, he needed to keep them employed or they would scatter. But back in 1994, Jackson and Fran Walsh turned their attention to expanding the two-page outline of what became the Frighteners into a feature-length script, taking the world of teenage killers they'd recently been immersed into to an extreme, having the dead killer come back to continue the relationship with the live one after going on a mass murder spree a quarter century before. Zemeckis liked the script but was unsure about shooting down in New Zealand until some location photos were taken to prove that it could pass for Randomsville, America. Everyone now convinced they got the project greenlit quickly through Universal Pictures, and Peter had his first studio movie. As sometimes happens, everyone's excitement with the project propelled it forward before the kinks in the script had been completely worked out, and they were constantly rewriting scenes throughout filming, which also prepared them for The Lord of the Rings, with Fran Walsh and her writing partner Philippa Boyens constantly working to tie it all together, from the initial drafts through the 12 months of principal photography, and for the next 3 years of reshoots, pickups, and editorial revisions.
You nosy little bastards! I said go home!
Like with the Rings trilogy to come, The Frighteners was storyboarded out by Jackson and Christian Rivers, an artist who had boarded Jackson's last several movies. They went through the script together with Jackson describing and Christian drawing, usually getting through 100 pictures a day. Unfortunately, time caught up with them and they had to begin filming with only 2/3 of the movie drawn out. But with them planning to shoot 3 epic films back to back to back across the North and South Island, the danger of the train derailing was perilous, and they spent an extensive amount of time committing the film to rough drawings while the script was still being written. It's essentially a cheap pass at making the movie. They took it a step further this time and digitized the drawings to create a rough but edited version of the movie called an animatic, with temporary dialogue and music to help convey the pace and tone. Deciding to take it a step beyond that, Pete used the models that were being built to refine specific shots for the animatic, adding a third dimension for better representation of scale and composition. For some of the more complex effect sequences, they borrowed a leaf out of George Lucas's playbook for the upcoming Episode 1, finding young and hungry effects graduates to design low-resolution CG mock-ups of the more complex visual sequences on the cheap.
Beyond the storyboarding, we also did like another level of planning, which is sort of like bringing the storyboards to life in a variety of ways. And it's called pre-visualization, is what it's called, previs.
Now flash back to 1995, and after working with Michael J. Fox on 3 previous movies, producer Zemeckis was able to bring him on board, knowing his cheeky sense of humor would be well suited for the project and its notoriously impish director, a trait he often exhibits in his own films.
Asshole.
Like with Sam and Frodo, Jackson needed someone grounded to play alongside a lead with big things on their mind.
Tell her she looks great!
Trini Alvarado fills the role admirably, and her character's name, Lucy Linsky, is a tribute to Melanie Linsky, who was discovered for Heavenly Creatures and has gone on to have a long career, as did her newly found co-star, Kate Winslet. He said, so obviously. Another reference to Heavenly Creatures is on the VHS double feature cover in the Linsky's bedroom, with the other feature being a documentary explaining the movie's backstory of mass homicide at the town's now derelict sanatorium for convalescents.
Got me a score 12, sir. That's one more than Starkweather.
Which was shot newsreel style and was the most fun they had during filming. But before filming began, the cast was brought down to Wellington 2 weeks early for rehearsal, a chance to further enhance and refine the script while working with the actual people who would be performing it.
Yeah, what's 10 inches long and white? Right, nothing!
Also, the eldest of the ghosts, the judge, is played by John Astin, a longtime actor and father of Sean Astin, who will go on to play Sam Gamgee, a faithful friend to the end.
This is Samwise Gamgee.
Your bodyguard?
His gardener.
Anyway, to create the look of the aged, decrepit judge, some hardcore makeup was needed. And though he didn't also work on The Lord of the Rings, they got legendary artist Rick Baker to design the makeup and prosthetics to be applied on set. A task requiring 5 hours in the chair, something the production team would encounter daily on their next shoot with dwarves, and elves, and hobbits, and cancerous orcs to prepare for the camera. The small town of Littleton on the South Island stood in for Fairwater, USA. After rehearsals, they spent a wet winter of 1995 shooting 5 weeks of exteriors around the town, battling the elements the whole miserable time, like they would do similarly 4 years later.
This is the biggest low-budget film in the history of the planet.
I know.
So how did they get the rights to make the biggest low-budget film on the planet? It goes back to Saul Zaentz, who still owned the rights all of these years later.
It's mine now, and I shall keep it!
He had a studio project in crisis that Miramax gargoyle Harvey Weinstein swooped in and financed independently, saving the day. Back in 1994, when Miramax had smartly bought the distribution rights for Heavenly Creatures, they'd included a first look deal for Jackson's projects. So with the Frighteners nearing the end, Jackson and Walsh turned up 3 fantasy ideas to keep the effects team going. The fantasy genre was largely considered a joke, but it would create enough work to keep the animators paid on time, which was running out. Jackson said later, fantasy was one of those B-grade genres. No quality movies were ever made in the fantasy genre. He wanted to change that, but when the Frighteners didn't do well at the box office, Universal pulled the plug on Kong, and the Apes fell to Tim Burton with mixed results. Eventually, the rise of the Planet of the Apes would be brought to stunning life by Weta Digital and their frequent collaborator Andy Serkis, following his jaw-dropping work as the bipolar ring addict Gollum in The Lord of the Rings.
You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
A property that finally had a deal with Miramax after an 8-month-long battle with Saul Zaentz for the rights. Jackson and Walsh wrote a 90-page treatment adapting the epic into 2 parts, which was given a strict budget of $75 million by Miramax. So when it later became clear that the budget would need to at least double to make the 2 films, Weinstein was livid and reacted in typical fashion.
The 2 you're about to go down a river of you hear me?
He gave them just 4 weeks to find another home for the project, or he was going to force his golden boy Quentin Tarantino to make it into one movie.
Harvey.
Sitting on a treasure trove of recently created concept art, test footage, animatics, sculptures, weapons, and props, Jackson enlisted some friends and tasked them with filming a half-hour pitch explaining the who, what, and where of the project. With just 7 days left, the company flew across the Pacific for one last meeting with Jackson's old friend Mark Ordesky at New Line Cinema. Ordesky's boss was the co-chairman Bob Shea. And in his hands, all their fates rested. He watched the proposal, turned to Jackson and said, "So I don't get this at all. Why would you make 2 films when there are 3 books? If you're going to do it justice, it should be 3 movies." But first, they had to finish shooting the Frighteners.
You have to do it over and over again so they can get the right one.
See, there's camera guys and sound guys, and there's people who are in charge of making sure that every time we do it, it looks the same. And there are people that are in charge of the lights, and there are people that are in charge of the cars and the people. And so what has to happen on every take is every single one of those people has to get their job done right. And usually it's my fault.
So back in 1995, they were deep in their 5-week shooting schedule of Littleton exteriors before scurrying off to the warm, dry sound stages and effects houses of the Capitol. Effects production was separated into the 2 departments I mentioned earlier, Weta Workshop under Richard Taylor and the newly formed Weta Digital under the leadership of Wes Takahashi, who came from ILM. Weta Workshop made all the physical effects like sculptures and prosthetics, while Weta Digital was in charge of the computer models and animations. It was helpful to have the animators down under in New Zealand with close access to the director, who could lead them shot by shot to avoid unnecessary and expensive rabbit holes, especially since many of the shots had not been storyboarded earlier and were subject to reinvention at any time. A typical effects shot in the Frighteners included 5 separate elements: the background plate, a miniature, a computer model, and the performer to top it all off.
Doc, I did it again.
For the Fellowship of the Ring, the equivalent effect shot could include an entire 3D Balrog, live elements of fire and smoke, an actor, a model, and a digital background. When it came to the ghosts, Jackson didn't want to confuse the audience and had them designed traditionally, semi-transparent and glowing. This was done in a bespoke program called SetSpook, in which they could change all the parameters based on the individual shot. Another bespoke software package created for The Lord of the Rings was called Massive, a program that could animate enormous numbers of characters acting independently of one another. This was essential for the huge battle sequences at Helm's Deep and the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. A technique they use for almost every shot is rotoscoping, which I mentioned for the earlier animated Lord of the Rings.
Aragorn, go to Minas Tirith. Save my people.
Technology now allowed the animator to isolate and adjust a digitized version of the image frame by frame, like with a ghost falling through the floor. This became so advanced by The Lord of the Rings that the entire trilogy is practically stitched together from all of the separate elements filmed and composited. Whole years passed between shots to complete a scene, and it was the rotoscoping, compositing, and color grading that helped combine them so beautifully as to never know the difference. A major component of effects work with both projects was the use of blue screen filming. The idea was to film on location, then recreate the camera movement using a motion control unit in the studio to match composite the added element into the original frame. For a few special shots, they had to carry blue backdrops with them to help later isolate the actor from the background. By the time they reached Middle-earth, sections of blue screen in the shot were standard practice, and all of those shots with blue screen had to be rotoscoped, later to be added with all the other elements for a complete shot. A character from the Frighteners that has a startling similarity to the later Nazgul of Mordor was known as the Reaper. They had intended it to be a combination of practical and CGI, experimenting with a rod puppet and an actor in costume, but it was too difficult to match the movements, and they ended up making the character entirely in the computer, filming the scenes on location without 100% knowing how they were going to pull it off on the back end. It was left to hope the animators could make it all work. This happened on an exponentially larger scale with The Lord of the Rings, shooting scraps and pieces of performances and reactions to things that had never been seen before. These were brought to life by Weta Digital and Weta Workshop, which also created some of my favorite effects with their use of enormous, high-detail miniatures they called bigatures, which they used in the Mines of Moria, Lothlorien, Helm's Deep, the Black Gates, and the White City of Minas Tirith. For the Frighteners, they used miniatures to film high-speed shots otherwise unobtainable in a safe manner.
Hey!
The graveyard itself is home to the last effect I want to talk about because it's an early example of how they brought my favorite literary character to life.
Who are you?
Not his business.
To achieve the look of Johnny Bartlett's face sliding down the tombstone, they filmed Jake Busey in full makeup, with his face surrounded by a blue screen board attached to a helmet he was wearing. They took this recording and digitally composited it onto the tombstone, using 3D animation to add the slime bubbles and residue, but the performance was all done by Jake Busey. An evolution of this technique was used to create the ring junkie Smeagol, known as Gollum.
Yes.
The actor Andy Serkis wore a green screen leotard on set when interacting with Sam and Frodo, with the intention of removing and replacing him in the computer. For the performance to ring true, Serkis was used as the basis for the animators to create a digital 3D Gollum, sometimes animating his movements from studio capture, and sometimes by removing Andy Serkis from the shot and layering Gollum in his stead.
We must stop.
It's been a few bumps and a few bruises, but, you know, like Bob Zemeckis and I used to say, pain is temporary, film is forever. You get through it.
In the end, the irony is kind of perfect. The Frighteners, that strange, fearless, supernatural oddball, opened to middling box office, and a public that didn't quite know what to make of it. Universal saw a disappointment, but history sees a rehearsal. It was a film that pushed technology too far for its moment, demanded too much from its audience, while quietly building the infrastructure and confidence that Peter Jackson would need for something much bigger. And then came The Lord of the Rings, a gamble so large it nearly broke its studio, and a trilogy that instead redefined what blockbuster filmmaking could be. The films didn't just succeed, they dominated, earning billions worldwide, sweeping awards and permanently altering Hollywood's relationship with fantasy, visual effects, long-form storytelling, and risk itself. Where The Frighteners was an experiment that barely survived contact with the marketplace, The Lord of the Rings became a cultural landmark, a once-in-a-generation convergence of craft, technology, performance, and belief. Seen together, they tell a single story, that great cinematic achievements rarely come from nowhere. They are built brick by brick, failure by failure, shot by shot. The road to Middle-earth ran straight through a rainy New Zealand graveyard, a struggling effects house trying to stay employed, and a filmmaker who never stopped loving the toy shop. Hollywood bet on the wrong movie, and then, almost by accident, backed one of the greatest achievements in cinema history.
We got a lot of gutless. We got a lot of. I heard shooting. I forgot my line. The whole thing.
I looked at the wrong place. I'm sorry.
Lately, I don't feel that you've been giving it 100%. I guess a job's out of the question.
I was backstage at the Golden Globes.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching.
And Jack Nicholson's backstage.
I really hope you enjoyed it. I spent a lot of time researching, but it was clearly impossible to put it all in. So if you have anything you'd like to include, please throw it down in the comments and I'll respond.
And he starts talking to me about Lord of the Rings. And he's like,
also, please like and subscribe and pass it around.
Did you die?
And check out my other essays. They're on my personal playlist, Swan Dive Into the Archive, on the Screen Jockeys channel.
And I said, well, yeah. I mean, it sort of depends on how you look at it, with him going away to the Undying Lands at the end. And he's like, what are you talking about?
Now, everyone go watch The Frighteners and The Lord of the Rings, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
I left a half an hour before that.
Judge, just rest your bones.
Yeah.